Now okay, so here we are on YouTube Live, and make sure everything's set up right here. Okay, recording, and we're on YouTube Live. Welcome to the Canadian Philosophy Show. I'm Michael Robert Caditz, alumnus of Vancouver Island University, Philosophy Department. And I have with me my friend and associate, Tagen Marshall, current student at VIU. Tagen, tell me something about yourself and what year are you in, and how's it going there at VIU? I miss VIU.
As do I. This pandemic has not been ideal. Not being at campus has definitely made my academic career, if you can call it a career, I do. But my academic career just a little more difficult. As for my standing, I'm kind of a weird mix because of my reduced course load. If I was a normal person, and this would be my third year, I'd be third year standing. But because I have a reduced course load, because of my disability and stuff like that, I'm still technically second year standing, but hey, we take it all in stride. And I'm happy to be with you tonight, and I think we have an interesting topic ahead of us.
Yes, we do, but before we get to it, I just want to chit-chat a little bit because I'm wondering how the pandemic has affected school at VIU. I can't even picture what it would be like to be a student there. I mean, when I was there, we sat, next to each other and talked, and now I understand there are no in-person classes. Is that correct?
For the majority of us, that is correct. If you are in the sciences, so like biology or chemistry or something like that, the only in-person study we have is in the case of running a lab, in which case you come, you run your lab, and you leave.
Right. So, in case we have listeners who aren't quite sure what university we're talking about, or which, it is Vancouver Island University. It's in Nanaimo here in British Columbia. And I think it's a great school. I think it's a very underrated school. I had nothing but excellent professors. I wouldn't say I had one class there in my entire undergraduate career where I thought the professor was downright bad. They're all so knowledgeable, and they're all they had different teaching styles. And I know some of the students, I won't name names, one of the professors, his teaching style, I really appreciated it. His style was sort of like Descartes, it's like rip apart everything you know and then start from scratch. And I really loved that because he really challenged me to look at my assumptions and question my assumptions and start over again and rebuild.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way of learning. So I really loved my experience at VIU, and this isn't a plug for VIU. It's just I'm just giving you my legitimate appreciation for the education I got there, and
I also can agree with Michael here. VIU is a very, despite maybe the accessibility challenges which we're working on, has been a phenomenal phenomenal experience to be a part of. I think we are particularly gifted in the philosophy department, and I mean all the professors are great, but I mean I'm speaking from the social sciences building. And I think we're gifted to have, as Michael said, the wide range of expertise and teaching styles that I have been able to encounter and work with and learn from. In fact, I won't mention names, but it was because of one philosopher instructor in particular that I started to gain my love and appreciation for the discipline. I now hope to make my career. So it is a wonderful experience. It is definitely unique with the pandemic, teachers having to adapt, but it's been super um, inspiring to see how, despite the challenges, the institution has tried to rise above that and still make it a interactive learning experience as much as possible.
Yeah, I don't even know how some of those philosophy classes I took could be taught online, but I'll leave that for you to experience. They were tough, even going in and listening to the lectures. Uh, but I had the same experience that you did. I was so inspired by the philosophy department of VIU. I didn't start out as a philosophy major. I started out in another field, and that field was fine. But I took in my first semester, I took actually it was a political studies course, which I think is part of the philosophy department. Oh, I'm not sure if it's
it's part of the
social sciences,
science,
right? Yeah, but not philosophy. Yeah, so it's under the umbrella of social sciences, and I took a political studies course, and I was so inspired, and it really got my mind working, and I realized that I wanted my mind to really work hard and deep, and the field that I started out in, it was great, but it wasn't as challenging in the way that I wanted to be challenged. So I switched to a philosophy major, and then from that point on, most of my classes were philosophy classes.
So what would you say was the turning point? Like, was there a subject in philosophy that turned you to that, or was it just like, I like the content I'm learning, period, so let's move in that direction?
A little bit of both, but the first philosophy class I took, so this was the next semester after I was inspired by the political studies class, I took the philosophy of, it was a Old Testament critical analysis of the Old Testament. So it was a religious studies course, which is part of the philosophy department. And I was really, really inspired by that because I had never... Oh, sorry, New Testament. New Testament critical Bible study. New Testament. And I'd never read much of the New Testament, and so it was just fascinating to learn about it. And it really inspired me the way that my mind opened, because I was closed-minded. It's like, I'm not a religious person. If I were, it wouldn't be the New Testament of the Bible that would inspire me. And up until that, I took that class, my personal policy was just to ignore it, not read it, and not and just kind of poo-poo it, right? Whenever anyone quoted from the Bible. So taking this class, I found so much value, not in the religious beliefs for me, but in the phenomena, learning about the historical context and what it meant, what the story of Jesus and the resurrection and all that, and how Jesus had this following, and he and then it brought up all these philosophical questions. Was Jesus a false Messiah? And it was just fascinating. It opened my mind, and I said, I got to do philosophy to open my mind and hear and learn about other angles than what I had been closed-minded to in the past.
Mm-hmm. I often think now that I am in a philosophy major and pursuing that as a lifelong career of mine and passion. I often think back to the first class where I was inspired to, because for me it was the pursuit. It was the pursuit of wisdom. It was the pursuit of truth, just as Michael, you talked about. It was my knowledge and reality course, and I remember reading Descartes' discourse on method, which you referenced Descartes earlier, And I remember working through other work and having those very meaningful, very moving conversations, and just thinking, if I do this as a career, I get to do that every single day. I get to enter into conversations with people in a whole new way. And so I would highly recommend the listeners we have out there, if you are a VIU student, pop by the philosophy department. And if you're not, I'm sure your institution has a philosophy department. I would encourage you to take a look at that, because philosophy can be applied in so many different disciplines in so many different ways that it is a powerful, powerful thing to study. Anyways.
Mm-hmm. So I know you have a topic, in language, or the impact of language, but before you launch into an introduction, I just wanted to point out that I might know a little bit about it, depending on what you're going to talk about, Tagen, because I took a philosophy of language course at VIU. That was one of my, I believe it was an upper level course. And
I take that.
Yeah. And the other reason I might have something to say about language is I discussed it in my as part of my honors thesis. My honors thesis at VIU was on Hume, David Hume, and I talked about the ambiguities in language, and how the ambiguities in language and the inability in many cases to really nail down and agree upon definitions of words, or just the ambiguities of grammar itself. No matter how much you agree, you're using language to agree, and the language that you're using might be subject to ambiguity, and how that casts doubt on analyticity. So I might get into that later, but I want to give you a chance to introduce the topic, and I'm curious what your research has been in your studies the last couple of years around language. So tell me, Tagen.
Well, language is something we use on a day-to-day basis, and so this is something that I've been working through in my philosophy of existentialism and phenomenology course. This is something that comes out of Nietzsche's work, out of Martin Heidegger's work. You could even say, in a sense, you could look at language in Albert Camus' work and the importance that plays. What I wanted to talk about was the use of language, but also coming to understand the phenomena of language as much as we can in the brief time that we have. And maybe we'll do a follow-up show. We'll see how this goes. So one thing I will pull from to just begin our discussion is a question for you, Mikey, and I say this to get our listeners engaged as well. Has there ever been a moment where you have used a word but not known its meaning?
I'm sure, yes. I'm sure. I know for sure that I have used words where I suspected what the meaning was, but I wasn't sure if I was using it correctly, but I used it anyway. And I think there have been times when I have used a word because I was imitating other people who used that word in that type of sentence, and I just hoped that it was being used correctly, but I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely been there. I've definitely done that myself. Unfortunately, when I put people on the spot and myself on the spot, I can never think of one. But I'm sure we've all done that. So let's dive into probably our more controversial figure, but the one I'm most familiar with, Martin Heidegger to start to look at, and we do have a show about that already, but to start to dig into this. So Martin Heidegger wrote an essay entitled Building Dwelling Thinking on, as you would suspect, building dwelling thinking. But what he presents in this essay is the fact that building, dwelling, and thinking are all interconnected. The word he starts his study off on is the word, because he raises the question, what does it mean to dwell? So what does it mean to exist in the world? What does it mean to interact with the world? What does it mean to be? He says that the German word bauen, which means to dwell, is our understanding, but because of language, we have forgotten what it truly means to dwell and exist. And he goes on to discuss what dwelling looks like, because I don't know, Mikey, what in your mind comes to mind when you hear the word dwelling? Like what comes to your mind?
What comes to my mind is like a physical dwelling, like a house, all right, or a place where one lives, and just being there, even without speaking, just being in that safe place that provides the necessities of life.
So you are quite spot on. This is, Heidegger points out that dwelling is commonly understood to be the place where we reside and where we find safety. He says, think of your home. You dwell at your home, but why do you dwell at home? Because you dwell at work. You go to work, you are in your place of work, but you do not actually dwell there. You pass through. You are on the highway when you're driving to VIU and home again, but you don't dwell there. So what makes the house different? He points out that it is not because of the house, but it's because of what phenomenon occurs in the house. That's where we feel safe. That is where we feel comforted. That is where we have relationships, because the art of dwelling is to be near. And this is why Heidegger says the word Nachbar in German, forgive my terrible non-German pronunciation, but the word Nachbar, or neighbor, means to be near to, or to be nearby. And he says that's more what dwelling is to be near something, someone. It's not necessarily a specific location. So when we are dealing with, but you see that's a far cry from what our initial definition of dwelling was. And Heidegger goes on to say that dwelling is an action of which peace, there is a sense of peace and a putting at rest, and that's what dwelling is.
So is it a verb, not a noun? So does Heidegger's definition of dwelling allow for gypsies or nomads to dwell?
Well, this brings us to an interesting point. Like, can you expand on that a little more? Just what you mean by that?
Well, if dwelling is a physical structure, such as a house, as we think of in our Western culture, or even other Eastern cultures and so on, any non-nomadic culture, if we think of a dwelling as a static thing, as a structure, a building, as a noun, then it would seem that that excludes nomads from having dwellings. But if we think of dwelling as a verb, it's an action, a behavior, then it would seem that nomads also dwell, just that they're the place that they dwell constantly moves. So the safety and the connections with people and whatever the properties are of one's dwelling, it just moves geographically, but it still remains intact.
Right. So I think we've come to an important point where I can move to explain what Heidegger calls the fourfold. The fourfold, and I'm still rusty on the fourfold, so Professor, if you're listening to this, please forgive me if I misrepresent this, but the fourfold is what is necessary for dwelling and even existence to occur, but in particular dwelling. So the fourfold is, well, four things, go figure. That is the sky, the earth, the mortals, and the divinities. So I will go through those systematically very carefully. So the sky, think of the sky on a beautiful sunny day. You can have clouds in it or not, whatever. But what is the sky? The sky for Heidegger, as my professor has explained it and as I understand it, encapsulates possibility and infinite meaning. The sky represents meaning, the openness, the possibility of many unfolding events to occur. Then we move to the earth, which is important for the nomads. The earth is where our very existence begins. There is no human unless they're born in space, and to my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. Our fundamental life begins on the earth, but it is because of this that we cannot fully understand what it is, because it's all we've known. And then we go to the mortals. And the mortals, guess who the mortals are? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, as a famous philosophical group is misquoted often. But that is us, and that is humanity. And so our first dwelling begins on the earth, by the very nature of our lives. And our mortals, us, we're called mortals because our life ends at a fixed point. We are waiting for our mortality to come towards us out of our future. And so Heidegger then talks about finding meaning and purpose. So building those relationships, dwelling in those relationships, to then have a good death. And then we move into the fourth one, the divinities. Well, the divinities back when Heidegger was writing was definitely more of a religious concept than perhaps it is now. For many people, it is hard to understand what Heidegger might mean by the divinities. The divinities are the encounters, I would say, the encounters we have with places and people that happen very rarely, but we encounter a great sense of, as my professor pointed out, gratitude and thankfulness, and this experience that we are seeing things for what they truly are. And so so to get to the point of the nomads, is that dwelling is an action, and in building we do dwell because as we build, we are intentionally making an action. We are intentionally investing ourselves in the building of this building. But dwelling means to have an encounter with people and with ourselves to determine what our meaning and purpose is. Especially as Heidegger says that our lives are a great unfolding. That when we are born, an unfolding begins, and that unfolding is our story, unfolding before us, waiting for us to discover it and create it. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, what I'm getting here is that language comes into play because you've pointed out how much more meaning, how much more profound meaning, existential meaning, the word dwelling has for someone like Heidegger than for an architect who says, I'm going to design a dwelling for you. Give me, for $500,000, would you watch the TV shows, right, where they have a real estate agent is taking a client around and they're looking for a dwelling. $800,000 and you can get this great dwelling. Totally different meaning than Heidegger's conception of dwelling.
And I think that comes to the idea of intention and intentionality. And that's why Heidegger still says that building is a form of dwelling, because we are putting intention, we are putting time and effort. And I think, because I do want to talk about Nietzschean language fairly soon, so we don't run out of time. But because when I get talking about Heidegger, we always run out of time somewhere. But to talk about the mission of building dwelling thinking is really to go beyond our conception of language, to say that language is a beautiful thing and it's a unique thing, but language is limited to those who experience things. And there is Heidegger talks about the fact that the true meaning of bauen, the true meaning of dwelling, has been lost, but there are still traces. And if man were to quiet himself and listen, the primal call, which I believe is the existential feeling in our heart, begins to be heard again. It can be heard, but we need to reach beyond our understanding, as you pointed out, Michael, that we need to, in a sense, tear our dictionaries up and start again to understand what it means to dwell, or for Martin Buber, what it means to say I love you to someone, to realize the implications behind that, the phenomena behind that, and that language is a phenomena. It's a living phenomena, and this is why it changes throughout time. And I think that's something you'll talk about if I quiet myself for 5 minutes so you can talk about it. But I hope that was a helpful introduction before we move along.
It was, and I want to interject something here, which is not an antithetical or contradictory viewpoint, but it certainly is a completely different angle. It's looking at language through completely different filters. So Bertrand Russell saw language as very problematic, and Bertrand Russell, one of the great philosophers of our times, recent times,
Mm-hmm.
the 20th century, I believe, thought that language was responsible for a lot of problems in philosophy and a lot of problems in fact, not only Bertrand Russell, but many philosophers thought that many of philosophy's greatest problems are simply problems of language, and because of ambiguity around grammar and around the meaning of words. And so Bertrand Russell, one of his main projects, was to develop a system of bypassing grammar and using logical symbols. In school we call this formal logic, which if you look at if you do formal logic, it looks like you're doing mathematics. You're working with symbols which aren't the same as math symbols, but they work much the same as. It's almost like you're working with equations or something. They're not equations, but they're mathematical expressions, and Bertrand Russell developed this system of being able to describe what he claimed to be, features of the world without using grammar and all of the ambiguity. We just talked about how dwelling, depending on how you interpret it, can be completely different things, and a limited literal view of dwelling as a structure completely bypasses the profound existential meaning that Heidegger attributed to the word. And so Bertrand Russell saw, grammar as a big problem, and developed this system of symbolic notation, symbolic logic. Now, of course, one of Bertrand Russell's students, Ludwig Wittgenstein, rejected Russell's claim that an inventory of things in the world was sufficient to describe the world, and Heidegger would be an example of that. So Heidegger is finding meaning in the word dwelling, which is much more profound than a physical thing that can be inventoried. So, but nonetheless, Russell developed a system of symbolic logic to describe and inventory things, not concepts so much, right? Not existential concepts. So, in this way, Bertrand Russell was very quite different than someone like Heidegger, because Bertrand Russell was concerned with an analytic inventory of the world. Yeah.
It's a little more empirical than
yes.
Than just strictly emotions and kind of feelings and observations, which there's nothing wrong with either of those, but I think on either end there is fault, because if we go strictly with this Heideggerian point of view of meaning, and even though it's a beautiful expression, that is still up for individual interpretation. Whereas if we go to the other end and say, well, we must have some sort of empirical evidence, then I think we get more Kantian, and then either it's I think it's Heidegger that says again, but it could be Nietzsche, so either one says that Kant has given us a meaningless world when he chopped it all up to the practice of science. So, uh, how do you agree with that point, or how would you respond to that point?
I found a lot of value in Wittgenstein. You know a lot more about Heidegger than I do, but I really like what I've heard today, what you've explained about Heidegger. But I really identify with Ludwig Wittgenstein, who points out that the meaning of life is not really about things in the world. You can't capture the meaning of life in an inventory of things in the world, people and objects. But Wittgenstein talked about the meaning of life as being in the present moment, and something that can't even be conceptualized. I really like that, and I really like what you just said about the sort of the existential profoundness of taking the time to slow down and just contemplate. But there's something else you said, which I want to know if I got this right, because it really had a lot of meaning for me, Tagen. I think when you gave the four aspects,
The fourfold.
yeah, described by Heidegger, it really got me thinking about the depth and the profoundness. But you said something about Earth. You said I think because we're so close to it that we can't really see it. Is that what you said? We can't understand it because we're so close to it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty right. I said because that's where our very existence began. We cannot fully understand and appreciate
Yes.
what the earth itself is.
Yes, we take it for granted.
Because that's all we know, and we limit it to the strictly physical. But I think what I was going to say about the nomads is the earth is their dwelling, and in a sense, in those relationships is where they find the actual buildings. Like you think about Heidegger talks about temples and places of worship. It is not necessarily because of the beauty of their architecture, but it is because of what the people experience when they go there. It's what lies beyond the limited understanding of time and space, but rather it talks about what is truly going on within the human heart, the human person, because that is them reaching out, looking for meaning, purpose, and direction.
It reminds me of this example that is used in so many different areas of philosophy, the category mistake example. So we could say in a way that to mix the static view of a dwelling as a building with Heidegger's view of dwelling as being the existential experience of life would be a category mistake. And the example that comes up so much, and I love it, is if Tagen, so I'm taking you to a VIU to give you a tour of the university, and I show you the social sciences building, and I show you the cafeteria, and I show you the student union building, and I show you every building at VIU. And I say to you, so Tagen, there you go, you've seen the university. And then you say to me, but Michael, thanks for showing me all these buildings, but where's the university? Right? Do you get my point? Yeah.
Where is what's actually connecting me to this place?
Yeah, the buildings are just structures, but the university it's like Heidegger's description of life. It's like it transcends any particular structure. The structures are there to keep the weather off you, and I guess more than that, there's some purpose in the structure, but it's not the essence.
Yeah, the 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 structure is only a hollow shell for what truly, it reminds me of the expression, if these walls could talk, like what would they say? But why do we say that? Because of the experiences we have in the rooms, in the hallways. um why do we have dorms, and why do we have VIU block parties and stuff like that? That's because the university is far more than where we go and sit in a classroom for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. But it's about the dialogue, the exchange of ideas, and I think, let me know when we can transition to Nietzsche. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there is far more. There's far more to say. Yeah, this is physically the university, but the university is truly the student population who come together
Yeah.
to learn and exchange ideas, and support one another in their journey. And that's what Heidegger talks about when he says our life is a great unfolding. One last thing I'll mention is Heidegger sees it as the mortal's duty to protect and preserve the fourfold. That we would be aware, that invest our time to protect and preserve things, just as we protect the ones we love. We preserve them from harm, but we also preserve memories and photos. We preserve ideas and books because we want to keep them close to us.
Yeah, so I can think of at least 3 senses of the word university, speaking about the ambiguity of language, right? So 3 senses that we've covered today. Then you can go on to Nietzsche. One would be the buildings. The second would be the institution. And so John Searle, a contemporary philosopher, talked a lot about institutional reality and the socially constructed meaning. So he might say that the true meaning of a university is the institution, not the walls, but the learning that goes on there, and the structure created by the institution, and the value of getting a degree, which is a socially constructed value. But the third sense would be Heidegger's sense, I'm guessing. It would be the existential experience and the meaning that people attach, the experience that they have, the full width and breadth of their life experience that they have being part of a community at this university, right? And what it means to their lives and to the meaning in their lives. And so I'm suggesting that's a third and a much more profound and broader sense of the word university. Anyway, let's hear about Nietzsche.
Okay. One last thing to tie that up is I think you just touched on what Heidegger would have touched on in his essay, because you touched on the concept of building and the importance of buildings, and how we interact with buildings. You've talked about the concept of dwelling. What does it mean to have those experiences and those relationships? But then you've also talked about the thinking aspect. Like, what does this mean for me as an individual? What is my plan and purpose? So I think you wrapped that up well. So Nietzschean language. Let's go real faster. Nietzsche is um, Friedrich Nietzsche, well known for his work Beyond Good and Evil, and I'm not as familiar with Nietzsche's work, so I'm gonna need Michael's help over here. But Nietzsche talks about when he is speaking in Beyond Good and Evil, he talks about how society has become simplified and in a sense I would say almost childlike, because they go throughout life not really being aware of anything in particular. It's just this kind of simplified, everything's good, kind of don't go beyond the surface type vibe. And I think, and Nietzsche says of the free spirits, those that kind of become aware of that and awaken to that, says that we should make room for offensive conversation, which I think is key to language, because language is meant to evoke something, whether that's a meaning or something. It's to invoke something. And he says we've lost the ability to have a frank conversation, and I think we sometimes see that, within our own society even today, that the ability to debate and respectfully disagree, but maybe have some harsh words in between, has been lost because we don't want to offend anyone. What do you think?
I'm always skeptical of claims that it used to be one way and now it's another way. When I hear our ability to communicate or to get along has been lost, the implication is oh, well, we used to have it and now we lost it. And I have trouble with that claim, because it seems like the human condition has not fundamentally changed. So does the claim, Nietzsche's claim that you're mentioning, are you suggesting that Nietzsche said something has changed in the last few hundred years or something? Where we've lost something that we used to have? When I think back on what I know of human history, I think if anything, the last several hundred years, since the Enlightenment, and there's been a lot of progress in being able to communicate and get along. And I don't know there's always been wars. There's always been conflict in human history.
Right.
Yeah, so elaborate.
Let me try and point out not too controversial of an example and just get your take on it. So, say I can talk about this one because I will take the heat as a person with a disability. There has been push in recent times to change the term from disability to diverse ability. There has been this attempt to suggest that diversity more accurately reflects and more is openly inclusive to individuals. Guess what? I push back, and I've been a vocal pushback, because we are not all the same. That is not it. Yes, we are all human beings, but we are not all the same. So to say diverse ability means, in a sense, it's trying to equalize things, and that is just not accurate. For example, life with a physical disability is going to be different by its very dynamics than, say, someone with a mental disability, which I also have. So to try and say, well, to try and bring this inclusivity and this equal playing field actually does me a disservice, because what I've had to work hard to achieve and attain by my working through, coming to terms with, and embracing my difficulties, my disability, has now been wiped away because it doesn't have the same meaning. But the counter argument is, well, that's just your individual opinion, which sure it is, but I think there's some validity there because I just don't see, and I think this is what Nietzsche's getting at, is this idea of empowerment and freedom for individuals to say what they mean, even if we run a risk of offending somebody sometimes.
So the words matter. What do you think about the term that I've heard in the past for someone with whatever, like a condition that you have, differently abled rather than disabled? How does differently abled sit with you?
The same way.
Same way as yeah.
Because I mean it's a nice gesture, but again, that's a downplaying of the struggle I've had to experience.
But is it really? Because if I say differently abled, aren't I suggesting that you have different abilities than I have? So you just said you've had to work hard to achieve things that come easy for someone who doesn't have the physical conditions or mental conditions that you have. So aren't you differently able? Don't you have some abilities that I don't have? Haven't you developed abilities that I don't have?
But we all have abilities we don't have. So why don't we just say that about everybody then? And that's my problem. Is the second as much as we've pushed for inclusivity, there needs to be the recognition that there are just some things that, I hate to use this term, but able-bodied people aren't going to understand. So to say differently abled, that is still an attempt to kind of simplify and look over and celebrate the differences. I would rather, when I am asked, I say, yeah, I'm disabled. That's it.
Sorry.
But I don't let that define me as a person. So why are we trying to change it to a term which defines a person?
So you're saying that disabled may not be a definition of you as a person, it's just a description of the fact that you have some disabilities. And whereas if somebody says, well, we need to use different language now that we're more enlightened, and we need to use inclusive language, and so we need to refer to you as, what did you say, diverse?
Diverse ability.
Yeah, or differently abled, then we're labeling you, and as opposed to simply describing a condition. Right. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Very interesting viewpoint.
But I also don't see any empowerment coming out of that. Like I am a firm believer that if an individual wants to be called a person with a diverse ability or differently abled, sure, I will respectfully give them that term, but I will also work to empower them to see that that is not actually a badge that they need to wear every day to mean something, but rather that is just a part of them. And I understand that comes with time. I mean, I've had my disability my whole life, and I haven't always been at the stage where I am. I understand that, but I want to see individuals like me be empowered rather than labeled and almost victimized by saying, Oh well, they're just differently abled.
Interesting perspective.
But anyway, that's a sidebar. But I think yeah, I think maybe we should do a show about that sometime. But the philosophy of disability, I'd be down. But anyway, but to Nietzsche, I don't know how much time we have actually, but
Only about 2
well,
minutes. Yeah.
okay, 2 minutes. So I'll let you do your closing rap, and then I'll do my closing rap.
Yeah, well, I think we've given some interesting examples and not run-of-the-mill examples tonight about the consequences of language and the ambiguity and the wide spectrum of meaning that can be associated with one word or two words. And just to recap, I mean, there's many more examples which we don't have time to get to tonight. But some philosophers like Bertrand Russell have noticed the ambiguity of language and tried to bypass grammar and communicate using symbols, but then, as his student Wittgenstein noticed, that leaves out a lot of the meaning of life when you inventory the world with symbols. Yeah, that's my wrap up. And what about you, Tagen?
I would say this. I would say language is a beautiful thing, but it is our job as human beings to pursue language, to pursue relationships. It is in that pursuit where we learn the most about ourselves and the world around us, that we come to understand that the sky is possibility. There's a reason we say sky's the limit. That the earth is our first dwelling place. And so coming to build relationships there, to understand that we are mortal, but we have this great unfolding before us. And finally to realize that there are moments where we will have profound insight and discovery about ourselves and the ones we love and care about. So always keep an open mind, realize that language is not limiting all the time, but that language is always being recreated and reused.
Yeah, when you hear a word or speak a word, you can wonder what broader meaning, what broader implications, what broader value there may be than what you thought was the literal meaning of the word, like dwelling, right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tagen Marshall, philosophy student at Vancouver Island University. I'm Michael Robert Caditz. You've been listening to the Canadian Philosophy Show, a weekly show. We're broadcast on CHLY, Nanaimo, on Sunday evenings from 7 to 8. And an archive of all our shows can be found on Mixcloud.com. Just search for the Canadian Philosophy Show. Thank you so much.